Hey everyone, so in this video I'm going to share with you 5 different tips for how you can draw waves. And waves is kind of a fun challenge and it will be good in terms of a couple of things. One, it'll help you understand some of the ideas with movement and lines and how you can use lines to create movement. And it will also help with your line control. That is another thing that we've been talking a lot about. Okay, so my first tip is that you want to use long flowing lines, and those kinds of lines will help show the movement of the wave. Depending on the way that you're drawing, you can start with having some sort of like the white surfy, type of area at the top, and then use your lines to kind of go down from there to actually show if it's like a really big wave, like I'm doing right here. And I have the top part that's kind of like I'm gonna keep white to show that, that there's like the surf up there at the top of the wave. And then a little bit of scribbly lines can kind of show like sort of that texture of the water. So my second tip is that you want to play around with your line spacing. And so practice having your lines sort of like sometimes close together and sometimes a little bit further apart, and just sort of see the different effects that you get when you change up the line spacing. Now, my third tip is practice with layering your lines. So you'll notice that in some of these, I'm layering over and over again, which will make it darker and darker. And then there's sometimes that you're leaving, more white on the paper. And by doing that, it will give a sense of like the way that the water has the reflective marks on it. So just playing around with how much layering you're doing of your lines is another thing that you can try. Okay, so my fourth tip is that you can try different pens. So this is a 005 pen. The ones that I was doing up until now before this was 08 pen. So the type of pen and the tip that it has is going to really impact the types of marks that you're going to be able to create and what type of drawing you end up making. So with this one, I start with sort of like some scribbly lines at the top. I'm doing that part around the surf, and then I'm using the 005 pen to kind of come around. And again, the marks are so much finer than they were in the other ones, and it's just going to give a totally different effect. So this one, you get a little bit more of a sense of like what the spray of the water might look like, or sort of like almost like feel like. And so I'm using these really like light wispy marks, but I'm just going over and over and over them to create that texture of the wave. And another tip is just to have variation in terms of how fast you're making your marks. So on this one, I'm doing really, really rapid, fast lines. And I sped this up a little bit, but you can slow it down if you want. But, for this one, I was just doing like really light, wispy, fast lines. And that will be also a different type of texture. So you can play around with the speed of your marks and, going from really fast marks to slower marks. Those will also really shape your drawing and how it comes out. And with this one, you'll notice that I'm incorporating all the tips that I've talked about so far. So I'm layering the lines a lot, and I'm playing around with the spacing. I'm having collections of lines to make kind of some of the areas dark, and then I'm leaving some of the areas lighter in order to make it look like the wave reflections. Another thing I'm doing on this one is I'm using some dark marks to kind of go around the wave at the top to show that like surf part, because that's the part that's kind of like a little bit more ephemeral, and you have to kind of think about how you're going to get that effect of the surf. And then getting like the darks from from where the waves are, and that's kind of like the sense of the water, that's a little bit more of the sense of layering. But with getting like the surf and that like those light reflective marks, doing something around in the background can be very helpful and useful to kind of get that, sense of the texture of a wave. Okay, you can also make kind of a stylized wave by just layering lines parallel to each other, and look at the spacing with that, right? So by having the spacing be very even between the waves, and then at the end, I'm kind of flicking my hand a little bit to kind of like loosen up the pressure. That's something else that you can try. This is kind of more of a stylized type, graphic type of waves, as opposed to being more, say, like realistic, right? So has a different sense than the other ones that I've done. And now this is just the same sort of idea, but with a thinner pen. And one thing that I'm doing with all of this is I'm just trying to kind of change up how I do the lines, right? So just to give you different effects. And with this, I'm trying to get my lines really even, but also kind of have a nice flow to them. So this is a really good exercise actually to practice if you're somebody that's been working on your line control and have it trying to work to get your lines to stay really even. This is a 005 pen, so this is your finer pen. Whereas before I was using a thicker pen, and you're going to get, obviously very different effects from that. Another thing that you can play around with is how much of a curve you have in your wave, right? So in this one, it's coming up a little bit more, whereas in the other ones, the wave was a little bit more subtle. And again, I'm doing, these parallel, trying to make it as even as possible. And it does give a bit of a sense of a wave. So this is, of course, more stylized than some of the other ones. And what I'm doing here is that I'm going in different directions. So it's like I have one section going in one direction and then it splits and it goes in another direction. And that's kind of shows the movement of water. So if you felt like you learned something new, please hit the subscribe button, like the video, leave a comment, and I will see you next time. As always, thanks for joining. And if you have any questions, just put them in the comments and I will respond. So I'll see you next time. Thank you.